0600 hours, February 12, 26. Gulf stretched flat and featureless under the pre-dawn darkness, the water reflecting nothing, absorbing everything. 52 nautical miles southeast of Bandar Abbas, the guided missile destroyer USS Nitze cut through the swells at 15 knots, her crew already at general quarters, though the sun hadn't yet painted the horizon. The destroyer displaced 9,200 tons and stretched 585 feet from stem to stern, a floating fortress bristling with sensors that could see across 100 miles of ocean and sky simultaneously. In the Combat Information Center, 3 decks below the waterline, the Aegis system hummed with purpose. 4 UIK-43 processors handled 128 simultaneous tracks while maintaining fire controlutions on the highest priority threats. The air search radar painted the sky in pale green sweeps, each rotation updating the tactical picture. Everything appeared normal. Everything was a lie. Intelligence had been flowing into Naval Forces Central Command for 72 hours, fragment assembled by analysts at Fort Meade into a coherent picture that nobody wanted to believe. Revolutionary Guard Navy commanders in Bandar Abbas had received encrypted orders originating from Tehran. The Iranian Ministry of Defense had mobilized maintenance crews at Zabul Air Base. 4 Sikorsky S-76 helicopters, designated Khosrow by Iranian military, had been fueled and loaded with communications equipment. The helicopters carried no weapons, at least none visible to satellite imagery. They carried something arguably more dangerous. They carried intent. The geopolitical situation in the Gulf had deteriorated dramatically over the preceding 6 months. A new administration in Washington had taken a harder line against Iranian nuclear ambitions, reimposing sanctions that previous diplomatic efforts temporarily lifted. Tehran retaliated with proxy operations through Houthi militants in Yemen, attacks on commercial shipping that had drawn American destroyers into the Red Sea theater. The Red Sea was distant, more than 1,000 miles away. The Persian Gulf was home. The Gulf was where Iran's Revolution Guard Navy operated with impunity, where they had built their entire strategic posture around denying the U.S. Navy freedom of movement through international waters. At 0327 hours, an E-2D Hawkeye early warning aircraft launched from the USS Lincoln, a Nimitz-class carrier battle group operating in the Arabian Sea, 600 miles to the south. The Hawkeye climbed to 25,000 feet and orbited a position that kept it just beyond Iranian territorial airspace, the mechanical boundary between international waters and sovereign territory. The aircraft's APS-145 radar swept the Iranian coast, painting military installations, tracking MERT traffic, cataloging every fixed and moving contact across the battle space. At 0445 hours, the radar operators detected movement at Zabul Air Base. 4 contacts lifting off the runway in close formation, climbing into the darkness, heading southeast toward the coast, heading toward the USS Nitze. The call came through secure channels to the Combat Information Center aboard the destroyer. 4 helicopters, estimated time of arrival 58 minutes. The tactical action officer pulled up the threat library and reviewed what intelligence assessments considered Iran's primary helicopter asset. The Khosrow S-76 carried no anti-ship missiles. The airframe itself posed no kinetic threat to a warship. Iranian pilots operated the aircraft with competence levels that ranged from adequate to merely reckless, nothing suggesting elite special operations capability. The helicopters would carry communications equipment, almost certainly electronic warfare personnel, possibly technical specialists. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Navy was preparing for something, assembling a command structure that would execute operational decisions from the helicopter rather than from shore-based facilities. Someone wanted to be airborne when whatever came next happened. At 052 hours, the USS Nitze's commanding officer, Captain Richard Vasquez, received a secure communication from NAVCENT headquarters in Bahrain. The message consisted of 6 words: authorization granted, rules of engagement modified. Captain Vasquez read the message twice, then filed it away. He understood the implications. He did not like them, but understanding and liking were separate categories in military command. The destroyer maintained course and speed, painting the approaching helicopters with radar, tracking their vector, calculating intercept geometry. The Aegis system updated continuously, feeding targeting data into the Combat Information Center's main display. 4 contacts, climbing to 800 feet, speed stabilizing at 110 knots, maintaining southeast trajectory that would bring them directly toward the American destroyer. At 0534 hours, the Iranian helicopters crossed into international waters. This was the moment lawyers and politicians had discussed endlessly in conference rooms thousands of miles away, the moment when Iranian state action crossed from theoretical threat into active presence over American vessels. The helicopters descended to 400 feet, reducing their radar cross-section by operating beneath the curvature of the horizon, as seen from Iranian shore-based radars. They were making themselves invisible to their own command authority. That was significant. That suggested operational security concerns about shore-based communication communication infrastructure. That suggested whoever had ordered this mission understood they were operating outside the protection of established command networks. The helicopters were becoming autonomous, no longer reporting to Iranian military hierarchy. The Nitze's commanding officer activated the Tactical Action Emergency Notification. The TAO was already aware. His console displayed the 4 helicopters as green contacts on the tactical display, each symbol updating with new velocity vectors, altitude data, and range information. The Aegis system calculated that all 4 helicopters would achieve closest point of approach within the next 14 minutes. At current trajectory, the closest approach would be within 7 nautical miles of the American destroyer. 7 nautical miles, close enough to conduct surveillance, close enough to coordinate complex operations, close enough to die. At 0548 hours, Captain Vasquez stood in the Combat Information Center and made a decision that would echo through international law, military doctrine, and diplomatic channels for years to come. He ordered the system set to maximum readiness. The SM-6 missiles in the Mk-41 vertical launch system cycled through their pre-launch sequences. 16 cells opened toward the sky. 16 missiles armed themselves and stood ready to convert electrical signals into kinetic energy traveling at Mach 3.5. The Phalanx CEWS, the 7-barrel Gatling cannon mounted aft of the superstructure, cycled through its targeting software. The system could engage aircraft targets at ranges up to 5,000 meters. Below that threshold, physics and reflexes combined to create a weapon that operated faster than human reaction time. The Iranian helicopters maintained their approach vector, 110 knots, 8 nautical miles out, 7 minutes to closest point of approach. The tactical action officer watched the contacts slide across his display, watched the range numbers count down. He had studied the intelligence briefs. He knew what these helicopters likely carried: communications relays, electronic warfare specialists, command personnel whose presence in the air suggested preparation for tactical operations that required real-time decision-making authority. The helicopters were preparing to coordinate something. Intelligence suggested multiple possibilities: a coordinated attack by fast attack craft, a cyber operation synchronized with physical action, an amphibious operation against American personnel or assets on the Arabian Peninsula, or something else entirely, something that analysts in comfortable intelligence offices could not yet imagine. At 055551 hours, with the Iranian helicopters 6 nautical miles out and descending to 300 feet, Captain Vasquez requested confirmation of rules of engagement. The reply came back within 90 seconds. Authorization confirmed. Threat assessment validates. You are cleared to engage at your discretion. The message was clear. The authority was absolute, and the responsibility was entirely his. The 4 Iranian helicopters descended to 250 feet and began executing a search pattern around the USS Nitze's position. This was the moment that changed everything. These were not helicopters conducting surveillance runs or reconnaissance missions from a distance. These were helicopters executing an operational search pattern, looking for something, coordinating with something, preparing for something that required real-time tactical decision-making. One helicopter broke formation and began orbiting the American destroyer's starboard side at a distance of 5 nautical miles. The other 3 helicopters continued their search pattern to the southwest, moving away from the destroyer but maintaining constant radio communication with the circling helicopter. The Aegis system tracked every movement, every rotation, every altitude change. At 055557 hours, the lead helicopter began transmitting. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard communications officer that aircraft keyed his radio and began broadcasting in encrypted channels that American electronic warfare personnel intercepted but could not immediately decrypt. The transmission lasted 43 seconds. The language was Farsi. The encryption was military grade. The intent was unmistakable. This helicopter was coordinating something. Someone ashore was receiving this transmission. Someone was making a decision based on this real-time tactical update. The USS Nitze was being positioned into whatever operation the Revolutionary Guard Navy had initiated. Captain Vasquez stood at the tactical display and watched the contact labeled Old Iranian Helicopter 1 continue its orbit around his destroyer, 5 nautical miles, moving at 105 knots, altitude maintaining 250 feet. The aircraft was broadcasting tactical information to 3 other helicopters and presumably to shore-based command authority. The aircraft was acting as a command node, a real-time relay station that gathered information and distributed it to other elements of an emerging operation. At this distance, at this altitude, with these capabilities, the helicopter represented an unacceptable threat to his ship and crew. The tactical action officer received the order: target Iranian Helicopter 1, prepare fair firing solution. The Aegis system prioritized closest contact and built a complete track, range 5 nautical miles, altitude 250 feet, speed 105 knots, heading 090 degrees. The system calculated intercept geometry and determined that an SM-6 missile could achieve impact in less than 30 seconds from launch command. The SM-6 could engage targets at ranges exceeding 150 nautical miles and altitudes up to 60,000 feet. Against a helicopter flying at 250 feet and 5 nautical miles away, the weapon was almost comically overpowered. It was also the only system aboard the USS Nitze that could engage an aircraft target while remaining outside the danger envelope. At 0559 hours, Captain Vasquez gave the order, fire. The vertical launch cell designated for SM-66 intercept opened completely. Explosive charge detonated beneath the missile. Solid rocket booster ignited with ferocious energy. The SM-6 accelerated from 0 to Mach 0.5 in less than 5 seconds, rising from the launcher at approximately 40 acceleration. The missile burst from the cell and climbed into the pre-dawn sky, its booster plume visible for miles. From the Iranian helicopter, the crew would have seen the launch. The tactical action officer aboard that aircraft would have recognized the plume signature, would have understood exactly what it meant. The helicopter would have begun evasive maneuvers, breaking formation, climbing or descending frantically, attempting to take some action that might generate enough separation to allow survival. None of it mattered. The SM-6 has an effective range of 160 nautical miles and can execute terminal velocity maneuvers that no helicopter can match. The Iranian aircraft never had a chance. 32 seconds after launch, the missile reached the helicopter's position. The S-76 Khosrow's airframe is constructed primarily from aluminum alloys and composite materials. It carries an empty weight of approximately 8,000 pounds. It can sustain structural loads up to 3G before experiencing permanent damage. The SM-6 warhead detonates with a yield of approximately 120 kilojoules, generating a blast wave traveling at supersonic velocity and shrapnel patterns engineered to defeat aircraft structures. The helicopter disintegrated, fuselage torn to pieces, rotor blades shredded, engines ripped from their mounts. The aircraft fell into the Persian Gulf in fragments, burning debris, creating a debris field that stretched across more than 3 nautical miles. The 4 crew members aboard helicopter, estimated at 5 to 7 personnel, died instantly. Their deaths were absolutely certain. Their bodies would never be recovered. Their mission, whatever it had been, ended in the moment the warhead detonated. The remaining 3 Iranian helicopters maintained their search pattern for exactly 7 seconds after the intercept. Then all 3 aircraft simultaneously accelerated to maximum speed and reversed course, heading northeast back toward Iranian territory. They never transmitted. They never attempted evasive maneuvers. They simply turned and ran. The Aegis system tracked them as they climbed, as they pushed their airframes to maximum performance, as they headed back toward Bandar Abbas at speeds exceeding 130 knots. The USS Nitze's commanding officer authorized the system to track them, but did not authorize additional engagements. The helicopters maintained international waters. They represented no imminent threat to the American vessel. Shooting them down would constitute additional acts of warfare that required authorization from higher command. At 0605 hours, the 3 surviving helicopters crack into Iranian airspace. The U.S. Nitze's radar continued tracking them until they disappeared behind landmasses, their electronic signatures fading as distance and terrain created radar shadows. Captain Vasquez stood in the Combat Information Center and made a second critical decision. He authorized immediate communication to Nav's headquarters. The message went over secure channels within minutes. 1 Iranian helicopter destroyed. SM-6 intercept confirmed. Direct hit. No survivors anticipated. 3 additional helicopters observed retreating to Iranian territory. Status of originating operation unknown. Awaiting further guidance. The response came from the office of the NAVCENT commanding officer. Message received. Actions taken within authorized parameters. Maintain current position. Surface action group from USS Lincoln Battle Group en route. Estimated time of arrival 3 hours. Do not engage additional contacts without explicit authorization. Stand by for diplomatic channels notification. Within the hour, the Iranian government issued its first response. A statement from the Revolutionary Guard claimed that one of their helicopters had been conducting routine patrol operations in international waters when it was attacked without provocation by an American warship. The statement characterized the attack as an act of aggression. The statement demanded an explanation. The statement threatened retaliatory measures against American assets in the region. The Iranian Ministry of Defense went further, claiming that the helicopter had been on a humanitarian mission, searching for a merchant vessel that had sent out a distress signal. The death of 5 crew members was characterized as murder. The attack was characterized as an unprovoked act of war against the Islamic Republic of Iran. In Washington, the State Department issued a carefully worded response. A spokesperson read from a prepared statement that acknowledged but provided no admission of American involvement. The United States recognized that an Iranian aircraft had been destroyed in the Persian Gulf. The United United States noted that the Iranian government had provided no evidence of the helicopter's humanitarian mission. The United States pointed out that Iranian military helicopters operating in international waters in coordination with other aircraft broadcasting encrypted military communications created circumstances that justified a defensive response. The statement concluded with a warning. The United States would continue to exercise freedom of navigation in international waters. Any Iranian interference with American naval operations would result in appropriate responses. The era of American restraint in the face of Iranian provocations had ended. Within the Iranian military command structure, the shock of the helicopter's destruction created cascading consequences. The Revolutionary Guard commanders who had authorized the operation faced immediate investigation. The order to launch 4 helicopters for an unnamed mission suddenly looked like reckless overreach that had resulted in the death of skilled pilots and the loss of valuable aircraft. Political factions within Iran's power structure seized on the incident as evidence that hardliners had pushed military doctrine too far. Diplomatic channels opened between Tehran and Oman. Messages flowed through Swiss intermediaries. Both nations signaled willingness to discuss the incident within frameworks of international law and establish procedures for maritime incidents. But the real story, the one that intelligence analysts would spend months uncovering, revealed something far more significant than a failed helicopter mission. Within 72 hours, NSA analysts decrypted the communications broadcast by the lead helicopter in those final moments before the SM-6 intercept. The transmission was not a tactical report. It was not a request for authorization. It was a launch confirmation signal. The helicopter had been coordinating a 12-point attack plan that included simultaneous strikes against 4 American military installations across the Arabian Peninsula. Tomahawk cruise missiles launching from submarines in the Gulf, fast attack craft with anti-ship weapons emerging from concealed positions near Iranian territorial waters. Cyber operations targeting American command and control networks synchronized to occur during the confusion created by the kinetic attacks. A coordinated, multi-domain assault that would have resulted in hundreds of American military casualties and potentially the destruction of at least 1 American warship. The Iranian helicopter was not conducting a surveillance mission. It was conducting a command authority function, acting as the decision node that would coordinate the final launch confirmations for all elements of the assault. The moment Captain Vasquez authorized the SM-6 intercept, he severed the entire chain of command. The helicopters heading back toward Iranian territory lost all contact with their commanding officers. The shore-based commanders lost all ability to coordinate timing with the other elements of the attack. The cruise missile submarines lost their launch confirmation window. The fast attack craft lost their coordination zone. The cyber operations teams lost their synchronization marker. The entire operation collapsed because 1 helicopter stopped transmitting. Within 48 hours, Iranian Special Operations Forces arrested the commanding officer who had ordered the mission. Within 72 hours, the Ministry of Defense issued a statement claiming that Revolutionary Guard Navy personnel had exceeded their authority. Within 96 hours, the Iranian government publicly distanced itself from the operation and blamed it on rogue military elements acting without government authorization. It was a standard playbook response, the kind of thing governments said when their military forces attempted something catastrophic and failed. The Iranian government could not admit that it had authorized an attack that would have constituted an act of war. The Iranian government could not reveal that American interception of encrypted communications had revealed the true scope of the planned assault. The Iranian government had to pretend that the incident was a tragic misunderstanding, a humanitarian mission gone wrong, an accident rather than the opening salvo of a coordinated multi-front attack. For Captain Vasquez and the crew of the USS Nitze, the aftermath brought its own complications. Within 2 weeks, 3 separate investigations opened. The Navy launched a command investigation to determine whether the decision to fire on the helicopter was justified. The Department of Defense Office of General Counsel launched a legal review to assess whether the rules of engagement as communicated actually provided sufficient authorization. The State Department launched a diplomatic investigation to determine what explanation would satisfy international law and maritime conventions. None of the investigations found fault with Captain Vasquez's decision. The decrypted Iranian communications demonstrated that the helicopter was coordinating an imminent armed attack. The decision to intercept that helicopter before it could transmit the final launch confirmation saved the lives of potentially hundreds of American military personnel. But the incident revealed something uncomfortable about American naval strategy in the Gulf. The United States was now intercepting Iranian military operations before they could fully develop. The United States was now making targeting decisions based on intelligence assessments of Iranian intent rather than Iranian capability. The United States was now operating operating on rules of engagement that assumed Iranian military operations represented sufficient provocation to justify lethal response. The line between self-defense and preemptive strikes had become dangerously blurred. The lines between traditional military command and authority structures and postmodern hybrid warfare had dissolved entirely. 6 months after the incident, Iranian military documents recovered through intelligence sources revealed that Tehran had planned 12 additional coordinated attacks across the year 2026, each assigned to exceed American defensive capacity. Each attack was designed to overwhelm American command and control systems with simultaneous threats. Each attack was designed to establish new tactical baselines that would normalize higher levels of violence in the Persian Gulf. The destruction of the single helicopter had disrupted the first operation. It had also revealed the scope of Iranian strategic planning. It had also set events in motion that would define American naval strategy for the next decade. Captain Vasquez received a promotion to Rear Admiral. He was transferred to the Pentagon for duty in the Office of Naval Operations. The USS Nitze returned to normal patrol operations in the Persian Gulf, her crew understanding that their destruction of an Iranian helicopter had prevented a disaster but had not prevented the underlying conflict. The geopolitical situation remained unresolved. The ideological antagonism between Iran and America remained undiminished. The technological gap in missile systems, electronic warfare, and naval combat systems remained absolute, but the psychological balance had shifted. The Iranian military understood that American destroyers operating in the Persian Gulf carried the authority and capability to conduct strikes against Iranian operations in international waters. The Iranian government understood that American intelligence assessment of Iranian intent could trigger American military response. The era of Iranian expansion in the Gulf had reached its limit. At 0600 hours on February 12, 2026, the USS Nitze conducting patrol operations in international waters. At 0605 hours on February 12, 2026, the USS Nitze had become the platform that turned back the opening moves of a coordinated Iranian assault. The helicopter that had been so carefully planned, so deliberately launched, so deliberately positioned, had lasted exactly 12 minutes from the moment American radar first detected its presence to the moment the SM-6 warhead detonated. 12 minutes to coordinate an assault that would have cost American lives in the hundreds. 12 minutes of real-time decision-making by military officers, understood the stakes, understood the capabilities, and understood that hesitation would be measured in the casualties that never occurred because one helicopter was destroyed before it could transmit its final orders. The incident would be discussed in war colleges for decades. It would become the definitive example of how American technical capability, American intelligence analysis, and American decision authority could combine to prevent conflict escalation through precisely timed application of military force at the critical moment when Iranian operations could be decisively disrupted. The Iranian government would never officially acknowledge what that helicopter had been attempting to coordinate. The American government would never officially explain the full scope of what had been prevented, but the personnel involved, the intelligence analysts who had decrypted the communications, they understood what the data meant. All of them understood that on February 12, 2026, an entire war had been prevented by one missile at precisely the right moment by one destroyer captain making the correct decision under circumstances of incomplete information but overwhelming certainty of purpose.